as far as a best residential designer, I feel that any kind of multi-family residential development like condominiums, etc., which have to be built, good architecture is where we recognize that in our country people come from very, very diverse backgrounds and very diverse cultures. And when they are coming and living in a condominium complex, they are representing the entire width and breadth of the country. So therefore, whatever we design should culturally be able to comfortably allow that family to live, whether they are from Kashmir, whether they are from Kerala, whether they are from east part of India, northeast part of India, or the west, or any part for that matter. And everybody has their living styles very different. So I think the challenge for us in every housing project that we design, and maybe that is what has got us the appreciation, is that flexibility in design and that sensitivity towards design for housing must be there. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that wherever the people might come from, whichever part of the country, the diaspora that is living there in terms of age, you are catering for a development for somebody who's 6 months old and can barely walk to somebody who's 90 years old and can again barely walk. So across that, you have to make sure that you create a living environment which is comfortable for each one of us. Definitely ACP is one material which is growing in popularity because today the world is moving a lot towards modularity, standardization, and therefore at site construction the choices that are made today are more that you have less labor intensive work, but things can be done easily at the site, fast at the site, and for those kind of things ACP material ends up becoming a favored choice many times. I don't think ACP necessarily has to be looked at something just for commercial buildings, whether it's retail or offices. I think if it is judiciously used, it can be used anywhere. For example, when we did the residential project called Forest for Omax more than 10 years back, actually 13 years back, we used ACP as a cladding material in the entire housing complex, and that was also one project which received many awards. But more than the awards, I think it was the way the material was selected and used that added a lot of warmth to the housing complex. Actually, there are a variety of things that one has to look at when you're looking at when an architect is selecting the material for the exterior facade of the building. One is, of course, the availability and how closely is it coming from, because as per LEED and GREHA and environment friendly ratings, you don't choose to necessarily bring material from too far. So one is, of course, local availability as much as that is possible. The second is climatologically it should be suitable. So if you are using, for instance, ACP, then you must have proper insulation in the walls, etc. The third is the consistency, that you want to use a material which is able to express your architecture in a certain manner. So sometimes if you want a certain kind of uniformity or consistency in the facade, then ACP being something which is produced in factories, so it's industrially produced material, it can give you that consistency. And the fourth is that it also, the material selection depends on what is the context of the building. So if it's a museum or a housing or a hospital or an office and public or private in nature use, all these things go into final selection. What is at the moment happening is that it is more like a firefighting approach that is being taken in our cities, where for variety of reasons, whether it is migration into the cities or it could be for any other reasons, that cities are growing obviously, and as a result, the authorities, the municipal bodies are rushing to solve problems, whether it is more roads, whether it is traffic congestion, whether it is water supply, sewage, etc., all these infrastructure issues. But a total approach towards how a city should be a model city, like it was done in the West a couple of centuries back, when Paris or London or Amsterdam, these are cities which changed over and became very modern. That overall futuristic thinking is unfortunately not happening at the moment. Yes, the smart city concept has come into being, but for me the smart city is just like the story of an elephant and 4 blind men, because anybody you talk to, is looking at smart city only from their individual perspective, whether it is technology or whether it is security or whether it is transportation solution or environmental. Nobody is looking at the holistic picture of how a city in the 21st century needs to get transformed in India if we have to welcome and properly accept urbanization. I think having had the privilege of living and working both in the US and in Europe, I think certainly we do not at any point need to copy or imitate what they have done or follow, but certainly since they are more advanced societies in some respects, particularly the respect of development, therefore there is a lot of learning from there we can do. And learning means we can absorb things that what they have done right and what they have done wrong. And at least what we should do is not repeat the mistakes that they have done. So as far as the US is concerned, they have been extremely sensitive to environment, at least in their country, maybe not globally, but there is a lot of consciousness towards environment, which is and also towards experimentation and adapting technology very fast. That is something which US is at the forefront of. When it comes to Europe, they are also extremely sensitive to environment, but besides being sensitive to environment, they are very sensitive to their own history and culture. So they have been very, very carefully been able to conserve their historical buildings, their art, culture, and then modernize. And that is something I think in India we need to learn, because we have a lot of culture and history behind us, and we have to take that along and not urbanize or develop at the cost of ignoring it. Kabri ji was one of those projects which we did, which we have consistently tried, made efforts to do, which is just a charitable contribution. That was a hospital built in a rural area and had very modest budgets. And the idea of the architecture, our approach was that a hospital is a place usually people go to when they are in distress. So when you are going to a place in distress, the last thing you want to be is intimidated or distressed by the environment that you have entered, the physical building. So therefore what we tried to build there was not something intimidating to the people, not something foreign to the people, but something that they are more comfortable with. And that's why we used the local materials, and we built buildings which were very simple, which were very inviting, which had a feel of rural flavor in them, and yet was a modern hospital, which any modern hospital has certain needs of, whether it is ventilation, whether it is medical gases, whether it is the rest of the hospital paraphernalia or infrastructure that goes into it. So while it accommodated that, the feel of the space was something that a rural person or anybody from the village going there for treatment would find something he's comfortable to. This Smart Medicity which we are doing today in Bhopal, which is a very, very large project and has about 3,000 beds and medical college, etc., is, I guess, the other spectrum of where healthcare design is going into. Now, that is a government hospital, and the government of Madhya Pradesh has made this very ambitious and bold gesture to go ahead and modernize a hospital called the Hamidia Hospital, which is in a landmark location in Bhopal, a very old hospital, and they have gone ahead and decided to not only upgrade that entire hospital but add its strength dramatically by adding another 2,000 beds, so to make it in total a 3,000 bed hospital. And that hospital, the way it is being designed by us, is, as we call it, a smart medicity, because when I went to the site I realized that this is not just a hospital, it is actually a thriving city in that 65 odd acres which it is, because you have there students living because of the medical college and the hostels, you have faculty living, you have doctors living, nurses living, and you have so many religious structures, mandir, masjid, all of those there, you have commercial shopping there, and of course you have the hospital there. So in all respects I found that it is like a complete city. So what our approach to it is that the design of it should be looked at on a holistic level, that we are designing literally like a small city. So by that I mean that it's not just about provision of healthcare and hospital buildings, but it's also about making sure that for the students studying there is a good quality of space, both buildings and open spaces. For the faculty or the doctors or nurses who are living there, who are going to live there for years, they must have a nice residential complex, so that once they have done their duty and gone back to relax with their family, they don't feel that they are still in a hospital, but they feel as if they've gone to another space of relaxation. So that is there. And then of course, being a medical college, you need play fields and all the other paraphernalia that goes for an educational institution. So all that is there, and that's how we are planning it, as a very, very smart medicity with the latest of technology, the latest of infrastructure, and an architecture which responds to Bhopal and yet is modern. First of all, I must compliment you for the amount of research that you've done on our organization. And the Rumtek Monastery is a fantastic and unique project, but it has a beautiful story behind it, because the reason it came up was that in 1980s was a time when it was not easy for foreigners to visit Sikkim. There were a lot of permissions required and things like that. So the Dalai Lama had approached the government of India to get a special permission to create a monastery here in Delhi. And lo and behold, he got this land in the heart of South Delhi. And they approached us to design this project. So because it is such a unique project, other than any other normal building that is done, so Mr. Kukreja, before designing this building, actually went to Sikkim and spent a couple of weeks in monasteries to understand how does a monastery function. And to his surprise, he found that a monastery works literally almost like a university, where the monks are coming and you get graded on the basis of the education time spent in the monastery and the amount of meditation and the spaces they need for meditation and all kinds of things like that. So it was very interesting learning from that aspect. In terms of the building materials and technology, yes, the challenge was that since the client wanted an exactly similar look and feel to be created, which you see in Sikkim, of the Rumtek Monastery done there, which has been done all in in timber, and to carve in timber is very easy, but to create those things in brick and concrete were a big challenge. So we used brick and concrete because those were the materials of relevance at that point for a climate like Delhi and easily available. And thereby we worked with craftsmen from Sikkim to be able to replicate that detailing in concrete and brick. So it was a very challenging but very interesting learning experience, showing that nothing is impossible to do eventually. And it was a very environment friendly project way back in those times, because even the paints that were used were not artificial paints, but they were using natural dyes and pigments. So in that sense, it was very environment friendly. It's very important to recognize that you're selecting the optimum quality material of ACP. Otherwise, there are many results to see now in cities where ACP has been put 5 or 10 years back and the state of it is deplorable. But I think it is more to do with the selection of the quality that you chose of ACP than anything else. What has happened in India, there has been this phase of architecture where we have tried a lot to ape the buildings from the West, and a lot of buildings in the West have ACP and glass as a design language, and that is what we have tried to do in India also. But because we have not been firm enough, consistent enough in choosing the right quality of glass, and more importantly the right quality of ACP, and a lot of clients end up going with cheaper options or do cheap imports from China of ACP. You see a lot of buildings today which in the first 2 years might have looked very nice and shining, but today that ACP or even glass for that matter is in a bad state.